Homeless girl shares her last meal with a stray cat. Then something unbelievable happens. Sarah Martinez huddled deeper into her worn denim jacket as the November wind whipped through downtown Chicago. At 17, she'd learned to find the warmest spots in the city. The heating vents behind department stores, the quiet corners of 24-hour laundromats, and when desperate, the relative shelter of the L train stations. Tonight, she had exactly $4.38 in her pocket, earned from helping an elderly woman carry her groceries home. The McDonald's on North Clark Street was still open, and the thought of something hot made her stomach growl. It had been 2 days since her last real meal. Just need to make it 3 more months, she whispered to herself, her breath visible in the cold air. 3 more months until she turned 18, when she could legally work full-time without questions about guardians or school records. 3 more months of avoiding the social workers who might send her back to her uncle's house in Milwaukee, back to the situation she'd fled 4 months ago. Sarah was smarter than most people realized. She'd kept up with her online classes using free library computers, determined not to let her circumstances derail her education. During the day, she blended in with other teenagers, wearing her cleanest clothes and using the gym showers at a community center where a kind receptionist looked the other way. But nights were the hardest. Nights like these, when the temperature dropped below freezing and the streets emptied of all but the most desperate souls. The warm lights of McDonald's beckoned. Sarah pushed open the door, savoring the blast of heated air. The night manager, Mrs. Chun, gave her a small nod. They had an unspoken agreement Sarah could stay for an hour if she bought something, and Mrs. Chun wouldn't ask questions. "Small fries and a hamburger, please," Sarah said quietly, counting out her coins. Mrs. Chun punched in the order, then glanced around before adding a small hot chocolate. "On the house," she whispered. "Cold night." Sarah's throat tightened with gratitude. "Thank you," she managed, taking her tray to the corner booth where she could watch both the door and the street. As she waited for her food to cool slightly, Sarah pulled out her prized possession, a worn notebook filled with her writings. She'd always found escape in words, creating stories about homes she wished she had, families she dreamed of belonging to. The notebook was her one luxury, purchased with carefully saved coins. A scratch at the window startled her. A scrawny orange cat sat on the ledge outside, its fur matted and one ear slightly torn. Its eyes met Sarah's, and something in that hungry gaze reflected her own situation all too well. Without hesitation, Sarah got up and pushed the door open slightly. "Here, kitty," she called softly. The cat hesitated, then darted inside, quickly hiding under her booth. Mrs. Chun pretended not to notice, busy wiping already clean counters. Sarah broke her hamburger in half, placing one portion under the table. The cat ate quickly but delicately, as if savoring each bite. When it finished, it didn't run away but instead settled against her feet, offering warmth and silent companionship. "Guess we both needed a friend tonight, huh?" Sarah whispered, reaching down to scratch behind the cat's ears. The gentle purr that rose in response brought the first real smile to her face in days. Little did Sarah know, but this simple act of kindness, sharing her meager meal with a fellow struggling soul, would set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. As the clock ticked toward closing time and the wind howled outside, neither the homeless girl nor the stray cat realized that their chance encounter was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey. Mrs. Chun was just starting to stack the chairs when the restaurant door chimed. A well-dressed woman in her 60s hurried in, stamping snow from her boots. Her silver hair was elegantly styled, though now slightly disheveled from the wind. "I'm so sorry," the woman said, "but I'm looking for my cat. Someone said they saw an orange tabby around here, and I've been searching all evening." Sarah felt the cat press closer to her legs, as if understanding the conversation. She looked down at the creature, noticing for the first time a faded blue collar nearly hidden in its matted fur. Mrs. Chun pointed toward Sarah's booth. "There's a cat over there with the young lady." The woman approached carefully, her eyes lighting up. "Oliver. Oh, thank goodness." She paused, taking in the scene before her. The teenage girl with the worn backpack, the half-eaten meal, and the cat now cautiously emerging from under the table. "He's been missing for 2 weeks," the woman explained, kneeling despite her expensive coat.
I'm Margaret Wellington.
"I live just a few blocks from here, in the River North area." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. She'd grown attached to the cat in just this short time, but she knew she had to let him go. "He was hungry," she said softly. "I shared my hamburger with him." Margaret's eyes softened as she looked more closely at Sarah. Years of working with the Chicago Youth Foundation had taught her to recognize the signs. The carefully clean but worn clothes, the protective posture, the way the girl's eyes constantly tracked the exits. "What's your name, dear?" Margaret asked gently. Sarah hesitated. "Sarah," she finally replied, adding nothing more. "Well, Sarah, you've done me an enormous favor by helping Oliver. Would you let me repay you with a proper meal? There's a diner around the corner that stays open late." Sarah's instincts warred with her hunger and the genuine kindness she saw in Margaret's eyes. Mrs. Chun, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Margaret Wellington is good people, Sarah. She helps run the youth center on Delaware Place." That detail, offered by someone Sarah trusted, helped her decide. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." As they walked to the diner, Oliver trotted between them, seemingly unwilling to leave Sarah's side. The cat's behavior wasn't lost on Margaret, who had never seen her usually standoffish pet take to someone so quickly. The diner was warm and nearly empty. Over hot soup and grilled cheese sandwiches, Sarah found herself slowly opening up to Margaret's gentle questions. She didn't share everything, but enough for Margaret to understand the broad strokes of her situation. "You're very bright," Margaret observed, noting how Sarah's vocabulary and manner betrayed her education. "Still keeping up with school?" Sarah nodded. "Online classes at the library. I'm not letting this situation ruin my future." Margaret sat back, her face thoughtful. "Sarah, I have a proposal for you. I have a large house, much too large for just me and Oliver. I also have connections with several programs that could help you finish school properly and find work when you're ready. Would you consider accepting some help?" Sarah stiffened. "I can't go back into the system. My uncle—" "No system," Margaret interrupted gently. "Just one person offering another person a hand up. We can work out the details properly through my foundation's legal team. Everything above board, but no institutions involved." Oliver jumped into Sarah's lap, purring loudly, as if adding his vote to the proposal. Sarah looked down at her empty soup bowl, then at the cat and finally at Margaret. She'd learned to be wary of offered help, but something felt different here. Maybe it was Mrs. Chen's endorsement, or the way Oliver had brought them together, or simply the bone-deep exhaustion of trying to survive on her own. I'd like to think about it," she said finally. Margaret smiled warmly. "Of course. Why don't we start with tonight? My guest room is warm, and you can meet with my foundation's counselor tomorrow to discuss options. No commitments, just a safe place to sleep and think things through." As they left the diner, the snow had stopped, and the street lights created halos in the clearing sky. Sarah felt Oliver brush against her legs as they walked, and for the first time in months, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Felt a lot like hope. The first few days in Margaret's brownstone were surreal for Sarah. Her room, a spacious guest suite with its own bathroom, was larger than any bedroom she'd ever had. The first night, she slept fitfully, startling at every creak and footstep, her backpack still packed beside the bed. Oliver, however, had claimed a spot on her pillow and refused to leave, his steady purring eventually lulling her into deeper sleep. Margaret proved to be thoughtfully respectful of Sarah's boundaries. She didn't push for more information than Sarah was ready to share, instead focusing on practical matters. "I've scheduled an appointment with Claire Matthews from our foundation," Margaret explained over breakfast. "She specializes in helping young people get their documentation in order: ID, social security card, whatever you need." Sarah picked at her eggs, anxiety churning in her stomach. What if someone tries to send me back?" Margaret set down her coffee cup. Sarah, you'll be 18 in 3 months. Claire can help us file for emergency emancipation, given your circumstances. But nothing happens without your consent. You're in control here. That afternoon, Claire proved to be a practical, no-nonsense woman in her 40s who reminded Sarah of her favorite English teacher from before everything fell apart. "All right," Claire said, spreading out forms on Margaret's dining room table. "Let's start with what documents you have and work from there." Sarah carefully pulled out her birth certificate and student ID, kept safe in a plastic bag through months of homelessness. As they worked through the paperwork, Oliver stationed himself between Sarah and Claire, as if supervising the proceedings. "Interesting cat you've got there," Claire observed, watching Oliver's protective behavior. "Margaret told me how you met. You know, I've known Oliver for years, and I've never seen him take to anyone like this." Sarah stroked Oliver's fur, now clean and glossy after a visit to the groomer. "We understand each other, I guess." The next week fell into a routine. Sarah started attending GED prep classes at the youth center, where she quickly proved to be ahead of the curriculum thanks to her dedicated online studying. In the afternoons, she helped Margaret with foundation paperwork, displaying a natural talent for organization that didn't go unnoticed. But trust came slowly. Sarah still kept her backpack packed. She hoarded food in her room, something Margaret pretended not to notice while ensuring the kitchen was always well-stocked with easy-to-grab snacks. At night, Sarah would sometimes wake in a panic, momentarily forgetting where she was until Oliver's warm presence grounded her. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, 2 weeks after Sarah's arrival. She was helping Margaret sort through donation records when Oliver suddenly began behaving strangely, pawing at Margaret and meowing insistently. "Oliver, what's wrong?" Margaret asked, but the cat only became more agitated. Sarah, who had grown attuned to Oliver's behaviors, felt alarmed. "Something's not right. He's trying to tell us something." They followed Oliver upstairs to Margaret's room, where they found her breathing machine for sleep apnea had silently malfunctioned, filling the room with an acrid smell of burning plastic. "If this had happened while I was sleeping," Margaret said shakily, looking at the melted device. That evening, as they sat in the living room with cups of tea, Sarah finally began to talk. She told Margaret about her mother's death 3 years ago, about being sent to live with an uncle whose drinking made him violent, about the night she finally ran away after he'd thrown a bottle at her head. Margaret listened without interruption, her eyes compassionate but free of pity. When Sarah finished, Oliver climbed into her lap, and she buried her face in his fur, letting tears fall for the first time in months. "Sarah," Margaret said gently, "you saved Oliver when he was lost, and today he might have saved my life. I believe things happen for a reason. You don't have to be alone anymore." Something shifted in Sarah that night. As she got ready for bed, she found herself unpacking her backpack for the first time, hanging up her few clothes in the closet. Oliver watched from the bed, purring his approval. But even as Sarah began to feel more secure, challenges were looming on the horizon. Her uncle had discovered her whereabouts, and his unexpected appearance at the youth center would soon test the fragile foundation of trust and safety she was building. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah was helping at the youth center's front desk, filing paperwork for the after-school program, when a familiar voice froze her in place. "There you are, you ungrateful little runaway." Her Uncle Bob stood in the doorway, his imposing frame blocking the light. Despite his attempt to look presentable in a clean shirt and jacket, Sarah could see the telltale flush of alcohol on his face. "You're not supposed to be here," Sarah managed, her voice barely a whisper. Her hands trembled as she reached for the desk phone. Before she could dial, Claire Matthews emerged from her office. She took in the situation with one glance and stepped between Sarah and her uncle. "Sir, this is a private facility. I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Claire said firmly, already pressing the security button under the desk. "That's my niece," Bob growled. "I'm her legal guardian, and I'm taking her home." "Actually, you're not," came Margaret's voice from behind him. She stood in the doorway holding a folder. "We have filed for emergency emancipation with documented evidence of abuse." There's already a temporary restraining order in place. Security is on their way, and the police have been called. Bob's face darkened. You think you can hide behind these rich people forever? He snarled at Sarah. You're nothing but street trash, just like your mother. Something snapped inside Sarah. Months of fear transformed into anger. My mother was a nurse who worked double shifts to support us until cancer took her. She was worth 10 of you. Get out. The security guards arrived, and Bob's bravado deflated when faced with their professional authority. As they escorted him out, he shouted, "This isn't over." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank into a chair. To everyone's surprise, Oliver darted through the center's front door just as it was closing, making a beeline for Sarah. He must have followed Margaret from home, something he'd never done before. The cat jumped into her lap, pressing his head against her chest as she shook with delayed reaction. His presence helped steady her breathing, just as it had done during nightmares. Margaret knelt beside her chair. He can't hurt you anymore, Sarah. We've got everything documented, the hospital records from the night you left, witness statements, everything. The judge is sympathetic to your case. But what if he comes back? What if he tries something else? Sarah's voice quavered. Claire joined them, holding a cup of water. That's why we're here. You're not alone anymore. We've already arranged for additional security at both the center and Margaret's house. That evening, Margaret's house was full of unexpected visitors. Claire stayed for dinner, along with Patricia Rodriguez, their lawyer, who brought updated paperwork for Sarah to sign. Even Mrs. Chun from McDonald stopped by with a bag of freshly baked cookies, having heard about the incident. Your uncle showed up at the restaurant last week, Mrs. Chun revealed. That's why I called Margaret. I knew he was looking for you. Sarah looked around the room at these people who had formed a protective circle around her, all brought together by one small act of kindness to a stray cat. Oliver sat in the center of it all, moving from person to person as if checking on everyone, before settling back in Sarah's lap. Later that night, as Sarah got ready for bed, Margaret knocked on her door. There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you, Margaret said, sitting on the edge of Sarah's bed. I've been talking with my lawyers about making this arrangement more permanent. If you're interested, I'd like to file for legal guardianship until you turn 18, and then, well, adult adoption is an option we could consider. Sarah sat down hard, Oliver immediately pressing against her side. You want to adopt me? Margaret smiled gently. Family isn't just about blood, Sarah. Sometimes it's about choosing each other. Like you and Oliver chose each other that night at McDonald's. Sometimes the family you find is stronger than the family you're born into. Sarah looked at Oliver, remembering that cold night when sharing her last bit of food had seemed like the only right thing to do. Can I think about it? Of course. There's no pressure and no timeline. Whatever you decide, you have a home here for as long as you want it. That night, Sarah dreamed of her mother for the first time in months. In the dream, her mother was smiling, stroking an orange cat, and saying, "Sometimes angels come with whiskers, sweetheart." But even as Sarah began to feel more secure in her new life, fate had one more challenge in store, one that would test not only her courage but the strength of these newfound bonds. 2 weeks after her uncle's appearance, Sarah was startled awake by Oliver's frantic pawing and insistent meowing. The acrid smell of smoke filled her nostrils, and an orange glow flickered through her window. The guest house next to Margaret's brownstone was on fire, and the flames were spreading rapidly. Margaret! Sarah bolted from her bed, Oliver racing ahead of her down the hallway. She found Margaret already awake, trying to gather important documents from her study. We need to get out now. Sarah grabbed Margaret's arm, practically pulling her toward the stairs. Oliver led the way, his tail held high like a beacon in the thickening smoke. They barely made it outside before the fire spread to their house. Standing on the sidewalk in their pajamas, they watched helplessly as firefighters battled the blaze. A police officer approached them, his face grave. Ms. Wellington, we found evidence of forced entry in the guest house and traces of accelerant. This wasn't an accident. Sarah's knees weakened. My uncle, she whispered. Margaret wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Detective Lisa Morgan arrived shortly after, her experienced eyes taking in the scene. "We'll find him," she promised. "The security cameras caught everything. He's not getting away with this." The next few days passed in a blur. They stayed in a hotel while insurance assessors evaluated the damage. The community's response was overwhelming. Mrs. Chun brought home-cooked meals. Claire arranged for temporary office space for the foundation. Sarah's classmates from the GED program organized a fundraiser for house repairs. But it was during this crisis that Sarah truly found her strength. While Margaret dealt with insurance companies and contractors, Sarah took over coordinating the foundation's daily operations, surprising everyone with her capability and dedication. "You've got a real talent for this," Claire observed, watching Sarah organize emergency grant applications. "You're helping people who are in the same situation you were in just months ago." Oliver remained their constant companion, somehow managing to comfort both Sarah and Margaret through the stress. He'd become something of a mascot at the temporary foundation office, greeting visitors and supervising meetings from his perch on the filing cabinet. A week after the fire, Detective Morgan brought news. They'd arrested Bob trying to cross the Wisconsin border. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, traces of accelerant on his clothes, and witnesses who'd seen him in the area. "He'll be going away for a long time," Detective Morgan assured them. "Attempted murder, arson, violating the restraining order, the DA is pushing for maximum sentences." That evening, as Sarah and Margaret had dinner in their hotel room, Sarah made a decision. "I want to accept," she said quietly. "Your offer about adoption, if it's still open." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Of course it is, sweetheart. And I want to do more with the foundation," Sarah continued. "I've been thinking we could expand the emergency housing program, maybe add a section specifically for teenagers aging out of foster care." And she hesitated, then pushed on. "I'd like to start a pet therapy program. So many kids in crisis could benefit from having a friend like Oliver." Margaret smiled proudly. "Those are excellent ideas. Why don't you draft a proposal? We can present it to the board next month." Oliver, as if understanding he was being discussed, jumped onto the table between them, purring loudly. Sarah scratched behind his ears, remembering that cold night when she'd shared her last burger with a stray cat. I thought I was helping him that night, but really he was saving me. He led me to you, to all of this. Sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come back to us in ways we never expect," Margaret replied. "You gave him a meal and he gave you a family. The insurance would cover the house repairs. The foundation's work continued to grow. Sarah's GED preparations were going well, and she'd already been accepted to community college for the fall semester. But more importantly, she had found something she thought was lost forever. A home, a purpose, and a family. All thanks to a simple act of kindness and an orange cat named Oliver. 6 months later, on a crisp spring morning, Sarah stood before a mirror, adjusting her graduation cap. Her GED ceremony was in 2 hours, and she'd just received news that she'd earned the highest scores in her class. Oliver sat on the dresser, meticulously grooming himself as if he too were preparing for the ceremony. "You clean up pretty nice, partner," she told him, smoothing down her new dress, a graduation gift from Margaret. The house, now fully restored and improved, buzzed with activity downstairs as Margaret prepared for the guests who would be coming for the celebration. So much had changed in less than a year. The adoption had been finalized 3 weeks ago, just after Sarah's 18th birthday. Her uncle had been sentenced to 15 years in prison. But perhaps the biggest change was within Sarah herself. The Wellington Martinez Youth Foundation, as it was now called, had grown significantly. Sarah's pet therapy program, Oliver's Friends, had been an unexpected success. They'd partnered with local animal shelters to bring cats and dogs to youth centers, helping traumatized kids find comfort in animal companions. Several teenagers had even found permanent homes through connections made during these sessions, just as Sarah had. "Sarah, Mrs. Chun is here," Margaret called from downstairs. Sarah gave herself one last look in the mirror. The scared, hungry girl from McDonald's was gone, replaced by a confident young woman with plans for the future. Oliver chirped and jumped onto her shoulder, his favorite perch these days. Downstairs, the house was filling with the people who had become her extended family. Mrs. Chun had brought enough food to feed an army. Claire was arranging gifts on the dining room table. Detective Morgan had stopped by with her wife, bearing a giant congratulations card. Even some of the teens from the Foundation's programs had come to celebrate. "Speech time," Margaret announced, tapping her glass with a spoon. Sarah stood, Oliver still on her shoulder, and looked around at the faces of her chosen family. "A year ago, I thought I was at the end of my rope. I had $4.38 to my name, and I chose to share half my dinner with a stray cat." She reached up to scratch Oliver's chin. "I didn't know then that I was actually taking the first step toward finding my way home." She continued, her voice steady and clear. "Someone once told me that angels sometimes come with whiskers. I didn't understand that until now. Every person in this room has helped me in some way, but it all started with this orange troublemaker here." Oliver purred loudly, drawing laughs from the crowd. "Starting this fall, I'll be attending Chicago Community College, majoring in social work with a minor in business administration. I want to help expand the Foundation's work to reach more kids who are where I was. Because sometimes all it takes is one person or one cat to believe in you." Margaret stepped forward, wiping tears from her eyes. "I have something for you," she said, handing Sarah an envelope. Inside was a document officially changing the Foundation's name to the Oliver Foundation for Youth Support, along with papers making Sarah a full board member. "You're meant for this work," Margaret said. "You and Oliver both." Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the dishes were done, Sarah sat in the window seat of her room, her permanent room, in her permanent home. Oliver was curled in her lap, and she could hear Margaret humming as she moved around downstairs. On her desk sat her graduation certificates, college acceptance letters, and a framed photo of her mother. Next to it was a new picture from today, Sarah in her cap and gown, surrounded by her new family, with Oliver prominently displayed on her shoulder. "We did good, didn't we?" she whispered to Oliver, who responded with a sleepy purr. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, other scared teenagers were facing their own struggles. But now, thanks to a chance encounter between a homeless girl and a stray cat, they would have somewhere to turn. Sarah smiled, feeling the rightness of everything settle into her bones. She had learned that rock bottom could sometimes be a foundation to build upon, that family could be found in the most unexpected places, and that the smallest act of kindness could change not just one life, but many. Oliver stretched and yawned, then settled back into sleep, secure in the knowledge that his job, bringing this family together, was complete.